A lonely rancher faced two giant Apache sisters asking for water. His life changed. The sun rose slowly over the dusty plains, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The wind whispered across the dry grass, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and earth baked by months of sun. In the middle of this endless landscape stood a small, weather-beaten ranch house. Its wooden walls were gray from years of sun and rain, the paint long gone, leaving only the raw, rough texture of the wood. Around it, the land stretched for miles, dotted with rocks, cactus, and the occasional stubborn tree that had somehow survived the harsh climate. This was the home of a man who had grown used to being alone, a man whose life had become a pattern of quiet work and silent nights. He was a rancher by trade, but not a man of many words. His life had not been easy, and he had learned to keep people at a distance. Visitors were rare, and he had learned to enjoy the silence that filled the empty rooms of his house. He rose with the sun and went to bed when it dipped below the horizon, living by the rhythm of the land rather than the rhythm of society. Most of his days were spent tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and checking the water tanks. Every task was simple, yet each one carried the weight of responsibility. This was the routine he knew, and he rarely imagined it could change. The rancher was a tall man, strong from years of hard work, with hands rough from handling ropes and tools. His face was weathered, lined from sun and wind, and his eyes held a quiet sharpness. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were measured, carrying a sense of honesty and directness that came from a life shaped by the land rather than by people. Over the years, he had lost track of friends and family, either to the pull of cities or the passing of time. He had learned to rely only on himself, trusting no one but his own judgment. Each morning, he would step outside and take in the vast emptiness around him. The cattle would be grazing quietly, the horses moving slowly across the plain. Birds would rise in the sky, their cries echoing against the distant hills. The rancher had grown to recognize every detail, the way the wind shifted across the land, the small tracks of animals in the dust, the change in the sky that hinted at rain. It was a lonely life, but it was one he understood completely. The land did not ask questions, did not judge, and did not leave. It was a constant, like the beating of his own heart. Yet even in the quiet routine, there were moments that made him pause. Sometimes in the middle of the afternoon, he would sit on the porch and watch the horizon, imagining what lay beyond it. The plains seemed endless, stretching into a haze of sunlight and distance, and he would wonder if there were people out there who lived differently. He remembered stories of his youth, when the town was full of faces, laughter, and noise, but those memories had faded like the paint on his walls, leaving only the echo of what once was. Life on the ranch was not without its challenges. The land was dry and stubborn, and water was always a concern. He had learned to plan carefully, checking the tanks and the small well he relied on for his livestock. During the hot summer months, the earth would crack and the grass would turn brown, forcing him to ration water and feed. The work was constant and demanding, but it kept him occupied and grounded. He did not mind the labor. It was honest, and it gave his life a sense of purpose that he could not find anywhere else. Despite his solitude, he had developed small habits that connected him to the world beyond his property. Each week he would ride into the nearest town to buy supplies, exchange news with the storekeeper, and listen to the occasional story from travelers passing through. But these trips were brief, and he preferred the silence of his home over the noise of others. He had no need for company, no desire for distraction. The ranch, the land, and the animals were enough to fill his days. One morning, as he went about his work, he noticed something unusual on the horizon. Two figures were moving slowly toward his ranch, barely visible against the shimmering heat of the plain. At first, he thought they were travelers passing by, perhaps lost or looking for shelter. But as they drew closer, he realized they were different, tall, strong, and moving with a careful determination that suggested purpose rather than wandering. He squinted against the sunlight, trying to make out more details, and saw that they were two women. Something about their presence unsettled him, not because he felt fear, but because it was unexpected. He watched them quietly, leaning against the fence as he assessed the situation. The women were clearly tired, their steps slow, and the dust clung to their clothing and hair. Their eyes were alert, scanning the land as if searching for something vital. It did not take long for him to understand. They were looking for water. His heart stirred, a reaction he had not felt in years. Instinctively, he knew that these strangers needed help, and despite his long-held habit of keeping to himself, he felt a pull to act. He approached them cautiously, keeping his voice low and calm. "Are you two all right?" he asked, his tone carrying neither accusation nor suspicion. The women hesitated for a moment, sizing him up as much as he was sizing them. Then one of them nodded slowly, a gesture of quiet trust. We need water," she said simply. The words were brief, but they carried the weight of their journey and the urgency of their need. The rancher felt a sudden awareness of the world beyond his land, of lives that intersected with his in ways he had never imagined. Without hesitation, he led them to the small well near the house. He drew water carefully, filling cups and letting them drink in silence. The women drank quickly, their relief evident in the way they leaned against each other, exhausted but grateful. The rancher watched them, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and concern. Who were they? Why were they here? He did not ask immediately, sensing that trust would take time, and that any questions might frighten them away. As they rested in the shade of the porch, the rancher brought out a small tin of bread and some dried fruit, placing it in front of them. The women accepted it with quiet gratitude, eating slowly, savoring each bite. He watched them, noting the careful way they moved, the strength in their shoulders despite the fatigue. Something about their presence felt different from anyone he had encountered before. There was dignity in their exhaustion, a sense of history and story that he could not yet understand. The afternoon passed quietly. The rancher returned to his chores, but he could not stop thinking about the women. Their visit had broken the pattern of his life, introducing a spark of unpredictability he had long avoided. For the first time in many years, he felt the stirrings of connection, the sense that his life, while steady and safe, could touch others in ways he had forgotten. Began to wonder how such encounters could change a man who had grown used to solitude, and whether his life, so carefully managed, was ready for something new. As the sun began to dip behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the land, he realized that the day had shifted in ways he had not anticipated. The women were still resting, their breathing steady, their presence quietly commanding his attention. He had not yet learned their names, their story, or their purpose, but he knew instinctively that this moment would remain with him. The land was still quiet, the wind still whispered, but something had changed. The rancher's world, once so predictable, had opened just enough to allow the possibility of something he had long thought impossible: connection, trust, and perhaps even friendship. He stepped back onto the porch, watching the horizon, feeling the weight of years and the sudden lightness of curiosity. He did not know what would happen next, nor did he try to predict it. For now, he only knew that life had a way of surprising even the most solitary of men, and that the presence of two strangers, tall, strong, and weary, had shifted the rhythm of his world. The quiet ranch, The endless plains and the slow pace of his days were no longer enough to contain the moment, and he felt, deep in his chest, that something important had begun. The next morning, the rancher woke to the sound of the wind rustling through the dry grass. The sun had barely risen, painting the horizon in soft shades of gold. He moved slowly, his body stiff from yesterday's chores, but his mind was restless. The two women, the Apache sisters, were still there, sitting quietly on the porch steps. They had not spoken much, only exchanging brief words between themselves. The rancher watched them from a distance, respecting their silence. There was something about them that commanded attention, a quiet strength beneath their exhaustion. He decided to start his day as usual, tending to the cattle first. The animals moved slowly under the early sun, their coats shimmering faintly in the light. The rancher moved among them, checking for injuries, giving water, and ensuring that all was in order. Yet, he could not shake the feeling that his life had changed overnight. The presence of the sisters had broken the rhythm of his solitude, and though he tried to focus on the chores, his thoughts kept returning to them. He wondered who they were, why they were here, and what had brought them across the vast, harsh plains to his small ranch. After tending to the livestock, he approached the sisters again. "Are you hungry?" he asked, trying to keep his voice gentle. One of them looked up, her eyes tired but alert, and nodded slowly. She spoke in soft tones, explaining that they had walked a long distance and had little food or water left. Their journey had been long and difficult, and the rancher felt a surge of sympathy for them. Though he had lived alone for years, he knew what it meant to struggle against the elements, to fight for survival on harsh land. He gathered some bread, cheese, and fresh fruit from his small pantry and placed it before them. They accepted it gratefully, eating slowly, savoring each bite as if it had been a rare gift. As they ate, the rancher began to notice details about the sisters. They were tall, with broad shoulders and strong arms, clearly accustomed to physical work. Their skin was sun-darkened and their hands were calloused. Despite their obvious fatigue, they moved with careful grace, as if every step was measured and deliberate. There was a quiet dignity in the way they carried themselves, an unspoken strength that reminded the rancher of the land he loved so dearly, resilient, unyielding, and quietly powerful. One of the sisters, the older of the two, finally spoke more clearly. "We need to reach the river before sunset," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was urgency beneath the words. "Our people, they are waiting for water and food. We cannot stay lost here." The rancher listened carefully, realizing that their journey was not aimless wandering, but a mission. The weight of their responsibility was clear in their eyes, and he felt a sudden respect for them. He knew the plains were unforgiving, that a wrong turn or a day without water could mean disaster. Yet here they were, moving forward despite exhaustion and risk. The rancher nodded, offering to help in whatever small way he could. He showed them the water tanks and offered to fill a few containers they could carry with them. He also gave them a rough map, pointing out safe paths and landmarks that could help guide them toward the nearest river. The sisters listened attentively, taking in every detail. They asked questions about the land, about hidden paths, and about possible dangers. It became clear to the rancher that these were not ordinary travelers. They were experienced, thoughtful, and careful, moving with a purpose he could admire. As the day wore on, he noticed small gestures that revealed more about the sisters' character. The younger sister helped with small chores, carrying water and gathering firewood, her movements efficient and steady. The older sister, despite her fatigue, kept watch over the property and offered guidance when needed. There was a sense of teamwork between them, a bond built on trust and shared responsibility. The rancher observed them quietly, feeling a connection forming, subtle but undeniable. For the first time in many years, he felt the stirrings of companionship, not the noisy, fleeting kind he had once known, but a quiet, enduring connection that promised stability and trust. During a brief rest in the shade of a large oak tree, the sisters spoke more about their journey. They explained that they were traveling to bring supplies to their family who lived near the distant river. The older sister's voice carried a sense of responsibility, while the younger sister's words showed a mixture of determination and anxiety. Their story was simple, yet it revealed the challenges of life in a harsh, demanding environment. The rancher listened, offering occasional advice, but mostly allowing them to speak. He realized that sometimes listening quietly and providing small comforts was the most valuable help he could give. By midday, the sisters had regained some energy. They helped him repair a section of the fence that had been damaged by wind and livestock. Working together, they moved quickly and efficiently, their strength evident in every motion. The rancher found himself enjoying the shared effort. Though he had long been alone, he discovered a sense of satisfaction and cooperation in the feeling that their work was meaningful and necessary. He began to realize that the presence of these women was more than a brief interruption. It was a challenge to his way of life, an invitation to see the world differently. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, the sisters grew restless. They needed to continue their journey, but they also needed rest. The rancher offered them a small cabin behind the main house, simple but comfortable. They accepted, expressing gratitude without words, their eyes conveying deep appreciation. While they rested, the rancher returned to his chores, but his mind was no longer solely focused on routine tasks. He found himself thinking about their stories, their courage, and the quiet determination that had brought them to his land. He felt a shift within himself, a curiosity he had not felt in years, a desire to learn more about the world beyond his ranch. Later, as the sun began its descent, the rancher brought out water and fresh food once more. The sisters ate in silence, but there was a sense of relief in their movements. The older sister spoke softly, acknowledging his kindness. "You have helped us more than you know," she said. The rancher nodded, unsure how to respond. He had acted out of instinct, not expecting gratitude or recognition, yet the words lingered in his mind, a reminder that even small acts could have profound effects on others' lives. As evening approached, the rancher walked to the edge of his property, watching the sisters resting in the cabin. The wind had cooled, and the plains were bathed in a soft golden glow. He felt a mixture of emotions, satisfaction from a day well spent, concern for the women's journey, and an unexpected anticipation of what tomorrow might bring. The presence of the sisters had disrupted the quiet of his life, but it had also introduced a sense of vitality and connection he had not realized he was missing. Night fell slowly over the plains, the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky. The rancher stood on his porch, sipping a small cup of tea, listening to the distant sounds of wildlife. The sisters were asleep in the cabin, their breathing calm and steady. The land was quiet once again, yet something had shifted. The rancher understood that his life, once predictable and solitary, had entered a new chapter. The encounter with the sisters was more than a moment of chance. It was the beginning of a story that could change everything he thought he knew about himself, the land, and the possibilities of connection. Before retiring for the night, the rancher made one last check on the water tanks and the animals. Everything was in order, yet his thoughts remained with the sisters. He realized that life had a way of surprising even the most solitary of men. A simple act of kindness, a glass of water, a piece of bread, had the power to create trust and open doors that had long been closed. He did not know how their story would unfold, but he knew that his days, once filled only with work and silence, were now intertwined with theirs. The night settled over the plains, calm and quiet, yet in the rancher's heart, a quiet excitement stirred. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conversations, and perhaps new understandings. The sisters had introduced uncertainty into his life, but it was the kind of uncertainty that promised growth and connection rather than danger. For the first time in many years, he felt that his life was not entirely his own, not in a way that threatened him, but in a way that enriched him. He had opened his doors to strangers, and in doing so, he had opened a small window into a larger world. The next morning, the plains were quiet, the sun rising slowly and warming the earth. The rancher woke before dawn, his body stiff from the previous day's work, but his mind alert. He could hear the faint stirring of the sisters in the cabin, moving quietly, preparing for the next leg of their journey. Their determination impressed him. Though exhausted from their long walk, they showed no hesitation, no complaint. Their strength and purpose were quiet but undeniable, and he felt a growing respect for them. After breakfast, the sisters approached the rancher with a serious expression. "We need to continue today," the older sister said, her voice calm but firm. "The river is far and our family will be waiting. They cannot wait any longer." The rancher nodded. He understood the urgency, the pressure of survival on harsh land, yet he also knew the challenges they would face. The river was many miles away, and the plains offered no shade, little food, and few safe paths. Traveling in the heat could be dangerous. The rancher gathered some water, filling heavy containers for the sisters to carry. He packed a few simple supplies: bread, dried fruit, and a small cloth to shield them from the sun. Though the items were modest, he hoped they would be enough to help them reach the river safely. He also gave them advice on which paths to take, pointing out areas where the land could be treacherous and suggesting routes that would be safer even if longer. The sisters listened carefully, nodding with understanding. Their eyes showed gratitude, but also determination. They would not fail in their mission. As they prepared to leave, the rancher noticed the younger sister struggling slightly with the weight of the water container. He stepped forward without a word and offered to carry it for a short distance. She accepted silently, relieved by the gesture. This small act of help felt natural to the rancher, though it was different from his usual solitary life. For years he had relied only on himself, avoided the company of others, and lived by the rhythm of his ranch. Now he found a quiet satisfaction in aiding these strangers, knowing their journey was as important as his own routine. The sisters thanked him, their voices soft but sincere. "We will not forget your kindness," the older sister said, her eyes meeting his. The words carried weight, not out of obligation, but because they were genuine. The rancher nodded, feeling a warmth he had not experienced in many years. He watched as the sisters set off across the plains, their figures tall and steady against the morning light. For a moment, he felt a sense of emptiness, missing the quiet presence of their company. Yet he also felt anticipation, curiosity about how their story would unfold. As they moved further from the ranch, the heat of the day grew stronger. The sun climbed higher, and the wind began to whip dry dust across the plains. The sisters walked steadily, but the strain of the journey was becoming visible. Their steps slowed at times, their breaths coming heavier, and the younger sister occasionally stumbled over rocks and uneven ground. The older sister offered quiet encouragement, keeping her sister's spirits strong. The rancher, observing from a distance, knew the challenges of such a journey and felt a mix of concern and admiration. They were strong, yes, but even strength could be tested by exhaustion, and harsh conditions. By midday, the sisters reached a small patch of shade under a lone tree. They paused to rest, drinking from the water the rancher had provided, and eating a small portion of bread. The older sister looked around, scanning the horizon with careful eyes. "We cannot linger too long," she said. "We must keep moving before the sun reaches its peak. Our people depend on us." Her words carried urgency, a reminder that their journey was not a choice but a responsibility. The younger sister nodded, her expression determined despite fatigue. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the rancher tended to his animals, but he could not stop thinking about the sisters. He checked his water tanks again, calculated how much supplies he could spare, and wondered if he could do more to help. He realized that his days, once filled with solitary tasks, had begun to stretch beyond their usual boundaries. The presence of the sisters had introduced unpredictability, but also purpose. He felt a growing connection to them, not as strangers, but as fellow travelers on a harsh and demanding land. As the afternoon approached, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. The wind picked up, blowing sand and dust across the plain. The sisters did not notice immediately, focused on continuing their journey. But the ranchers saw the change in the weather and grew concerned. The land could shift quickly. A storm could make travel dangerous. He felt a tension in his chest, knowing that the journey ahead would be harder than it seemed. Yet he also knew that he could not stop them. They were determined, and they would not abandon their mission. The storm arrived faster than expected. The sky darkened, and a sharp wind began to tear across the plains. Rain fell in heavy, cold drops, soaking the ground and making the dust stick to the sisters' clothing and hair. The younger sister stumbled again, slipping on the wet earth, and the older sister grabbed her hand to steady her. The rancher watched from a distance, his heart racing. He wanted to call out to offer help, but he hesitated, unsure if approaching them in the storm would be wise. Yet he could not stand still and watch from afar. He mounted his horse and rode out toward them, moving quickly across the wet plains. The storm made visibility difficult, the wind whipping against his face, but he pressed forward. When he reached the sisters, they were struggling to maintain balance and move forward against the wind. Without hesitation, he helped steady them, guiding them toward a small, natural dip in the land that offered some protection from the elements. The sisters accepted his assistance without question, trusting him in a moment of vulnerability. Once they were in a safer spot, the rancher shared what little supplies he had left with them. He offered water, more bread, and a dry cloth to help shield them from the wind and rain. The sisters were grateful, their eyes showing relief and appreciation. "You have saved us from the worst of the storm," the older sister said, her voice carrying both sincerity and strength. The rancher nodded, feeling a quiet pride. It was a strange feeling, helping people he barely knew, yet it felt right. For the first time in years, his life had purpose beyond routine chores and solitude. As the storm passed, the sisters rested while the rancher kept watch. The clouds slowly broke apart, revealing the setting sun casting golden light across the plains. The sisters drank deeply from the water, ate a small portion of food, and began to regain their strength. The older sister spoke softly, recounting how difficult the journey had been before they arrived at the ranch. She described their family waiting by the river, their needs growing with each passing hour. The rancher listened, absorbing the weight of their responsibility and the quiet determination that had brought them across such harsh land. By evening, the storm had cleared completely, leaving the air cool and the plains sparkling with moisture. The sisters prepared to continue their journey, stronger now after the brief rest. The rancher provided the last of his supplies, advising them on a safe route to reach the river before nightfall. "Keep moving steadily," he said. "Do not risk rushing. The land can be unforgiving after a storm. The sisters nodded, following his guidance with careful attention. As they disappeared into the distance, the rancher felt a strange emptiness. Their presence had brought life and urgency into his quiet world. For years, he had been content with routine, with solitude, and with the rhythm of his own life. Yet now he realized that the world could offer connections, trust, and shared struggle in ways he had not imagined. He returned to his ranch, tending to the animals and securing the property for the night. But his mind remained with the sisters, hoping their journey would be safe and successful. That night, the rancher sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear sky. The plains were quiet once more, but his heart was not. The sisters' journey had reminded him that even in solitude, one could make a difference. One act of kindness, offering water and shelter, could ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could not yet see. He understood that life, even on a lonely ranch, could be connected to the larger world, and that courage and determination existed in people everywhere, sometimes appearing where it was least expected. The night deepened, and the rancher finally retired to his small cabin, feeling a quiet hope he had not known in many years. The journey of the sisters had brought urgency, challenge, and reflection into his life. He realized that the land he loved so dearly was not just a place for survival, but a place where trust, courage, and compassion could meet. For the first time, he understood that the world beyond his ranch was not entirely separate from his own life. It could intersect in moments of need, creating bonds that could change everything. The next morning, the rancher awoke to the soft glow of sunlight spilling across his porch. The air was cool and still, and the plains stretched endlessly in every direction. Though the storm from the previous day had passed, the land still carried a dampness from the rain, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. He stepped outside, stretching his arms and surveying his property. The cattle grazed quietly, the horses moved lazily, and the world seemed calm. Yet the calm did not reach him fully. His thoughts remained with the sisters, wondering where they had reached by now, and whether they had managed to navigate the plains safely. He remembered the weight of responsibility in their eyes, the urgency in their voices, and the quiet strength they had shown, even in exhaustion. Something about their determination had touched him deeply, stirring feelings he had long thought buried under years of solitude. For decades he had lived alone, managing the ranch, tending to the animals, and living by the rhythm of his own life. Now he felt a pull to do more, to step beyond routine and become a part of something bigger than himself. By mid-morning, he was repairing a section of the fence near the far end of the property when he heard faint voices carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was his imagination, but then the voices grew clearer. He glanced toward the horizon and saw two figures approaching once more. The sisters. Their pace was slow, and their bodies showed the strain of the journey, but they were moving steadily. Something must have happened, he thought. Perhaps the river had been farther than they expected, or they had encountered obstacles he could not see from the ranch. The rancher hurried to meet them, carrying a few supplies he had gathered for the day. As they drew closer, he noticed the younger sister limping slightly, her steps uneven. The older sister guided her carefully, supporting her weight. Without hesitation, he rushed forward. "Here, let me help," he said, lifting one of the water containers and holding it for them. The sisters exchanged a look of relief, accepting his help with gratitude. It was clear that their journey had become more difficult, and the rancher felt a surge of concern. Once they reached the porch, he offered them fresh water, bread, and dried fruit. The younger sister drank deeply, her body shaking slightly from exhaustion. The older sister spoke softly, explaining that they had encountered obstacles on their way to the river: a fallen tree blocking the path, a small flood in a dry creek, and the sudden storm that had slowed their progress. They were still determined to reach their family, but the weight of the journey was showing, and it was evident that they could not continue without rest and support. The rancher listened carefully, his mind calculating the best way to help. He realized that if he allowed them to continue immediately, they might risk injury or exhaustion. Yet he also understood their urgency. They could not delay for too long without endangering those waiting at the river. A difficult choice pressed on him. Should he let them go, trusting their determination, or should he offer more than temporary shelter, intervening directly to ensure their safety? He decided to act. "You will stay here until you are strong enough to continue," he said firmly. "The river is important, yes, but so is your safety."
You cannot reach it if you collapse along the way.
The sisters hesitated, understanding the wisdom in his words, but also aware of their mission. The older sister nodded slowly, acknowledging his concern. "We are grateful," she said, "but we cannot stay too long. Our family is counting on us." The rancher smiled gently. "You will stay just long enough to rest. Then we will continue together. I will help you get there safely." He knew that this decision marked a turning point, not only for the sisters, but for himself. Until now, he had observed, offered small help, and returned to routine. Now, he was committing himself to something beyond his solitary life. He was choosing to become an active part of their journey. Over the course of the day, the rancher worked with the sisters to prepare for the next stage of their journey. He set up a small resting area with blankets and shade, ensuring they could recover from exhaustion. He offered guidance on navigating the remaining plains safely, pointing out landmarks and suggesting paths that would avoid treacherous terrain. The sisters listened attentively, absorbing every detail. It was clear that they trusted him, not only for his knowledge of the land, but also because of the quiet strength he exuded. As the day passed, small conversations began to flow. The sisters spoke of their family near the river, the challenges of their daily life, and the ways they supported one another. The rancher shared brief stories of his life on the ranch, the struggles of maintaining the land, and the quiet satisfaction of caring for animals. Though their worlds were different, the common thread of hard work, responsibility, and resilience created a bond between them. The sisters' presence brought a new dimension to the rancher's life, a sense of shared purpose and connection he had not known in years. By afternoon, the sisters were stronger, their bodies rested, and ready for the next stage of travel. The rancher offered to accompany them part of the way, knowing that the journey ahead could be challenging. "You will not travel alone," he said. "I will guide you until you reach the river. It will be safer that way." The older sister hesitated, considering his words carefully. After a brief pause, she nodded. "Your help is generous."
"We accept it," she said. It was a quiet affirmation, but it carried significance.
Trust had been established and a partnership had begun. As they moved across the plains, the rancher noticed how different it felt to be part of a shared journey. The rhythm of his steps, once dictated by solitude and routine, now synchronized with theirs. He observed their strength, resilience, and determination, and felt a sense of purpose beyond his own needs. Each step forward was not only for the sisters, but for himself as well, a step toward connection, toward involvement in a story larger than his own. The day's journey was not without challenges. The plains were uneven, rocks and small gullies making each step difficult. At one point, the younger sister stumbled, her ankle twisting slightly on the rough ground. The rancher rushed to her side, steadying her and examining the injury. "It's not broken, but you need to rest," he said. He helped her to a safe spot under the shade of a small tree, offering water and a cloth to wrap her ankle. The older sister knelt beside her, assisting gently but efficiently. It was a moment of care and cooperation, reinforcing the trust and bond between them. As the sun began to lower in the sky, they reached a small rise overlooking the plains. The river was still some distance away, but the sight of distant water glinting in the sunlight gave the sisters renewed energy. The rancher felt a sense of satisfaction in seeing their spirits lift. The journey had been difficult, but the determination of these two women, coupled with the support he offered, was proving stronger than any obstacle. For the rancher, this moment was a revelation. Life could be full of challenges, but shared effort, trust, and courage could overcome them. By evening, they found a suitable place to rest for the night. The rancher helped set up a temporary shelter, using blankets and supplies to create a safe space for the sisters. He prepared a simple meal from what he had brought, and they ate together, sharing stories of the day and plans for reaching the river. There was a sense of accomplishment in the air, tempered by the awareness that more challenges awaited. The sisters' journey was far from over, but the rancher had become an essential part of it, a guide, protector, and companion. As night fell, the plains were quiet, the stars appearing one by one against the darkening sky. The sisters rested, their breathing calm and steady while the rancher kept watch. He reflected on the events of the day, realizing how much his life had changed in just a short time. The quiet solitude he had once cherished now felt incomplete, and the presence of the sisters had introduced purpose, urgency, and connection into his routine. He understood that life, even on a remote ranch, could intersect with the lives of others in meaningful ways. Before retiring for the night, he ensured that the area was secure and that the sisters were comfortable. The younger sister, though tired, looked at him with gratitude in her eyes. "We could not have made it this far without you," she said softly. The older sister nodded, her expression steady but sincere. "Your kindness and courage have changed our path," she added. The rancher felt a quiet pride and humility. He had acted without expectation, but the impact of his actions was clear. He had become more than a rancher alone on the plains. He had become part of a story larger than himself. As he lay down to rest, he thought about the journey ahead. The river was still miles away, the land challenging, and the days to come uncertain. Yet he felt ready. The turning point had arrived. He had chosen to step beyond solitude, to embrace responsibility for others, and to become a part of a shared journey. It was a choice that would shape his life in ways he could not yet imagine, connecting him to people, purpose, and the larger rhythms of the land he loved. The morning sun rose gently over the plains, casting a warm, golden light across the land. The rancher awoke feeling a quiet determination, a sense that today was important. The sisters were already awake, quietly packing the supplies the rancher had helped them prepare. Their movements were careful and precise, showing that despite the long and difficult journey, their strength and determination had not faded. The rancher watched them for a moment, noticing the quiet bond that had grown between them. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, offering water and shelter, had blossomed into trust, respect, and a shared purpose that connected their lives. After a simple breakfast of bread and fruit, they set out across the plains together. The river was still some distance away, but the sisters moved steadily, guided by the rancher's knowledge of the land. He pointed out safe paths, warned of uneven ground, and suggested where they could find temporary shade. Each step was deliberate, measured, and careful. The younger sister occasionally glanced at him, her eyes showing gratitude and confidence in his presence. The older sister walked beside him, her posture strong, yet a quiet warmth radiated in her expression, acknowledging that they were no longer alone in their journey. The day was long, and the sun was high in the sky when they faced their first significant challenge. A narrow canyon cut through the plains, its sides steep and rocky. The river's path led directly through it, but the way was difficult to navigate, especially carrying water and supplies. The younger sister hesitated at the edge, fear briefly flashing in her eyes. The rancher stepped forward, extending a steadying hand. "We will go together," he said. "Step by step, carefully. I'll be right beside you." His words carried assurance, and the sisters trusted him without question. They moved slowly through the canyon, each footfall deliberate. Loose stones shifted beneath their weight, and the wind carried the faint sound of rushing water far below. The rancher stayed close, guiding them over tricky spots and helping when one of them stumbled. In that moment, he felt an unusual sense of fulfillment. For years he had lived alone, relying only on himself and the routines of his ranch. Now he was part of something larger, a mission of responsibility, trust, and courage. Each step forward was more than physical. It was symbolic of the change taking place in his life. By late afternoon, they reached the far end of the canyon. The river came into view, glinting in the sunlight, its waters flowing steadily and calmly. Relief washed over the sisters' faces. They had succeeded in reaching their destination, and it was due in part to the rancher's guidance and support. The younger sister knelt at the water's edge, letting the cool water flow over her hands and face. The older sister watched her family's home nearby, a small cluster of simple houses and cultivated land. Their family had been waiting, anticipating their arrival, and the sisters' relief and happiness were evident in their expressions. The rancher watched quietly from a short distance, a smile touching his lips. He had expected little when he offered his help, but the result was profound. He realized that one act of kindness had grown into something far larger. The sisters' journey had tested endurance, courage, and trust, and by choosing to assist them, he had become part of their story. The plains, once empty and solitary, had connected him to the lives of others in a meaningful way. He felt a quiet pride, not in heroics but in the simple, essential act of helping others when it mattered most. The sisters' family emerged from their home, running to meet them. There were embraces, tears of relief, and quiet laughter. The rancher observed without intruding, knowing that his role was complete, yet satisfied to witness the reunion. The sisters introduced him to their family briefly, their words simple but sincere. Gratitude shone in their expressions, and the rancher felt a warmth he had not known for many years. Though he had not expected recognition, it was clear that his help had made a tangible difference. The lives of these people, in a small but real way, had intersected with his own, leaving a lasting impression. After the initial excitement settled, the sisters spoke privately with the rancher. "We could not have made it without you," the older sister said. Her voice was steady, calm, but carried the weight of genuine appreciation. The younger sister nodded in agreement, adding softly, "You saved us, and you guided us when we needed it most." The rancher felt an unfamiliar emotion swell within him: connection, warmth, and quiet satisfaction. He had spent years in solitude, yet now he understood the meaning of participation, trust, and shared struggle. The bond between them, though forged quickly, was strong and undeniable. The rancher spent the next few days with the sisters' family, helping them with tasks that required extra hands. He repaired a fence that had been damaged in a recent storm, carried water to the fields, and helped move supplies to storage. Each task, simple yet necessary, reminded him of the value of cooperation and community. The sisters' family welcomed him without hesitation, their gratitude expressed in quiet smiles and shared effort. For the rancher, this was more than work. It was a revelation. His life, once measured only by his own routines, had expanded to include others, creating a sense of purpose he had not realized he was missing. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection, The rancher would sit by the river, watching the water flow and listening to the soft sounds of the plains at night. The stars reflected in the water, and the air carried the gentle scent of wet earth and growing plants. He thought about the journey, the sisters, and the choices that had brought him here. The quiet rancher who once valued solitude above all else had learned the power of connection, compassion, and courage. He realized that life, even in the most remote places, was richer when shared, and that small acts of kindness could create ripples far beyond one's imagination. Before leaving to return to his ranch, the sisters' family expressed their deep gratitude once more. "You have changed our lives," the older sister said softly, "and in doing so, you have changed your own." The rancher nodded, understanding fully. His life had been altered by a single choice: to step beyond routine, to offer help without expectation, and to trust in the strength and determination of others. The journey had tested him, taught him patience, and opened his heart to new possibilities. Returning to his ranch, the plains felt different to him. The land was still vast and demanding, but it no longer felt lonely. Memories of the sisters, their journey, and the reunion at the river brought a sense of fulfillment and connection that he had not known for decades. His daily routine continued, yet it was now enriched by the knowledge that life could intersect with others in meaningful ways, and that even in solitude one could make a difference in the lives of others. Over the following weeks, the rancher occasionally visited the river to check on the sisters' family, bringing supplies and offering assistance when needed. Each visit reinforced the bond that had formed during their journey. The sisters' respect and trust toward him deepened, and in return, he found a sense of belonging he had never experienced on his own. Life on the ranch continued, but now it was intertwined with friendship, trust, and community. A life richer than he could have imagined. The rancher's perspective had shifted completely. The plains, once symbols of isolation, had become a bridge to connection. The rancher understood that courage was not only in facing the land alone, but in reaching out, offering help, and trusting others. The journey of the sisters had been a turning point, transforming his life and opening doors that had been closed for decades. He had discovered that kindness, trust, and compassion were as vital as water on the plains, essential for survival, for growth, and for the human spirit. Years later, he would remember the journey of the two sisters as the moment his life truly changed. He often reflected on the day they first appeared at his ranch, weary and desperate for water. That encounter, simple yet profound, had reshaped his understanding of the world. It taught him that life, no matter how solitary, could always intersect with the lives of others in meaningful ways. Through a single act of kindness, he had become part of a story that extended far beyond his own small world. And though the ranch remained quiet, the plains still stretched endlessly under the sun. The rancher no longer felt alone. In the distance, he could picture the sisters, their family thriving by the river, and he knew that he had helped bring that outcome to life. In that knowledge, he found a lasting peace, a sense of fulfillment, and the quiet joy of having made a difference. His life, once measured by solitude, had grown into something far greater, proof that even one person living quietly on a remote ranch could change lives and be changed forever.